We're starting by importing React and the use Formik hook from the Formik library. Formik is a popular library for handling forms in React, and use Formik is a hook that helps us manage form state and handle form submission. Next, we import Yup. Yup is a JavaScript schema builder for value parsing and validation. We'll use it to define the validation rules for our form fields. Here we define our validation schema using Yup's object method. This method allows us to set rules for each field in our form. For the name field, we're enforcing that it must be a string and it is required. We provide a custom message that will be displayed if this rule is violated. For the email field, the schema requires it to be a string, to be formatted as a valid email address, and it is also required. Again, custom error messages are defined for when these validation rules are not met. For the password field, the validation rule requires a string with a minimum length of 8 characters, and it is required. This is a basic example of enforcing a password strength requirement. We then initialize the Formik object using the use Formik hook, which will be configured with initial values for our form fields, the validation schema, and a function to handle the form submission. The initial values property sets up the initial state for the form fields. In this case, all fields start as empty strings. We then pass the validation schema we defined earlier directly into Formik's configuration. This connects our form with our Yup validation rules. The onSubmit function will be called when the form is submitted. Here we have the opportunity to handle the form data, such as sending it to a server or logging it to the console. Now let's look at the JSX for the form. When the form is submitted, it will call Formik's handleSubmit method, which in turn will invoke the validation process, and if successful, the onSubmit function. Here we create an input field for the name. We wire up the input to Formik's handleChange method to update state as the user types, and Formik's handleBlur to record when a field has been touched. We also bind the value of the input to Formik's values. Conditionally, we display an error message for the name field. This uses Formik's touched and errors state to determine if the message should appear. We would repeat a similar process for the other fields such as email and password, creating input fields and displaying error messages conditionally. Finally, we add a submit button to the form. When clicked, the form will be submitted if all validation rules are met, and the onSubmit function that we defined will be executed.